28th, 2020 to order. The first item for discussion is the South Puget Sound Wildlife Area Update. And for this, we have Alan Billingsley representing the Rotary Club of Clover Park. Good evening, Alan.
I'm glad to be here and see you all virtually. Wish this wasn't the way we had to do it, but you're getting used to it by now, aren't you?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, this is my second Zoom meeting. We had Partners for Parks a few minutes ago for the day, so this is the way it is. Tonight, I'm here to tell you about a project that's kind of taken place in our community and has grown to amazing proportions. And that's the adoption of the South Sound Wildlife Area by our Clover Park Rotary. And I'm going to go ahead and start my slideshow here and kind of talk. My slideshow doesn't have many words in it because I can't stand the PowerPoints where someone basically reads you the slides. So we'll spare you that. Did we get to screen share? Let's see. Screen share. Can we see my slide presentation yet?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so this is the South Sound Wildlife Area located just off Phillips Road. If you're not sure where it is, it's just across from Hutloff Middle School. It's about a 100-acre site of property that was originally given to the state of Washington, deeded over back in 1922 from the original land claim, Andrew Bird. And the property has been in the state's possession from that day on, with one small, tiny exception. We'll go through that as we go here on to the project. This is an aerial view of the site itself. The site has a lot of multiple uses that the state's currently got going. This area here is the Lakewood Hatchery, which hatches the trout we throw into American Lake and let the kids fish for every year for Lakewood's Fishing Day. Chambers Creek runs down this canyon here through this woodland area. This site over here is the Andrew Bird Cemetery, where the settlers actually that were in this area originally are buried. Could be up to 100 graves here. These ponds, we'll talk about those in a little bit. The area where we have adopted is inside the red zone, and it's one of the very last pieces of open prairie in Lakewood that is accessible particularly to the public. The cemetery is the only piece of property on this land that is still deeded to the Bird family. There's a small section in the middle that holds about 100 grave sites. We're not sure exactly how many are there. We know some of the people that are there, some are marked and some are unmarked. So that's an issue for the future that we're trying to work out with some groups to locate and define exactly who's there and who's been buried there. The site also contains 2 endangered species that are being studied. The western pond turtle, which is an endangered freshwater turtle in the Northwest, and the Oregon spotted frog, which oddly enough lives mostly in Washington state here. Both these species are being studied in the ponds in the wildlife area by biologists to figure out why they have succeeded in this particular area. They've had the pond turtle there for a number of years, and they've taken the turtles to areas down by Chehalis and similar ponds, tried to transplant them. And while the turtles live, the eggs don't hatch. So they're trying to determine what it is that's special that we've got here in this wetland area that helps these indigenous species live. And these are indicator species, of course, for the healthiness of the area as a whole. The ponds where these 2 live are fed by a spring in the area. The spring comes from this zone, and these are the ponds. So this area here currently is off limits to the public because, of course, they don't want to mess with any of the study that's going on or the related tranquility of these ponds. The project that the Rotary has taken on has a number of different aspects, and we'll kind of just talk through these. Once again, here's the red area that is the open prairie land. This is the entrance down here off of Phillips Road, and there's a parking lot down here. This is where the Bird Family Cemetery is located. The red area is basically the area that's open to the public during daylight hours. And you can see there's a lot of trails that have been developed and are mowed in this area. This trail along here is paved and it's ADA accessible over to this hill. It's about half a mile worth of trail. One of the projects that we've accomplished about 50% of. We have added a fence along Phillips Road down here. We've added retaining walls. We're going to put an interpretive garden area in there of indigenous species, picnic tables. Oh, there's a restroom in there that has not been used for years because of vandalism that someday we'd like to ultimately get that back open. And then, of course, prairie restoration is one of the things we want to do because this is a very unique area to the Puget Sound area. The prairie areas here and at Fort Lewis are diminishing, and they've been used for other things for so long that they're not really a natural open prairie any longer. We're losing a lot of it out at Fort Steilacoom Park because it's becoming a more urban park. This is what the area entrance looked like before we adopted it. This is where you enter into a parking lot. This is the old restroom and parking facility for the area. These old buildings were originally part of an education area that housed different types of pheasants and birds, where schools could come and see bald eagles, pheasants, some other birds that they had in these that were either on display for education or they had been injured and the wildlife department was taking care of them. These have been long since gone since the 60s. Here's what the exact area looks like back in the early 60s. And you can see this was truly an educational area that attracted schools from all over the Northwest. When I was in third grade in North Tacoma, we took a trip out here myself to see the pheasant area and the game farm and explore some of the things that were going on in here in the hatchery. The area originally was used as a game farm, which is why it gets the nickname game farm. The state for years would raise pheasants here by the thousands. They had a policy of releasing all the males in Western Washington for the hunters, and they take the females over to Eastern Washington and release them into habitat, hoping that what they were doing was enhancing the pheasant population and the game hunting over in Eastern Washington. And after 25 years of the project, they realized that they were releasing the pheasants over here for the hunters to shoot and the females over in Eastern Washington for the coyotes to eat, because the birds just did not have a very good survival route, being raised in pens all their lives. They were basically coyote food. That, and due to funding, the program slowly shut down sometime in the late 80s. And that's when the area came into disrepair. It's basically been ignored by the state as far as the prairie and the upper area because they have not funded it. So Rotary has decided that we're going to take this on as a community project and try and return this area back to what it was in the 60s, both a public use area and an educational area. This shows one of our first work parties here, where we put in a rock wall, tried to fix up this grass area that used to have an indigenous garden species in it. You'll notice a big guy in a red shirt there you may recognize at the first work party. And there's what it looks like after our first and second work party. This area up here is designated to be an indigenous species interpretive garden where we're going to put plants with little QR codes next to them so people can come up, look at a plant, scan that with their phone, and get an interpretation and information about what they're looking at as far as the plants go. This is also the parking area for the public use zone. You can see those buildings once again as we start to get them cleaned up through this process. And you'll notice there's no fence here. The fence was removed years ago from Phillips Road all the way down to the end because it was becoming a hazard and cars were running into it. There's another work crew, our second one. This time we were joined by students from Pierce College and a number of other local clubs here. This summer, we were fortunate enough to be able to get the Northwest Youth Corps to come out and spend 2 entire weeks working all day, doing a number of projects. One of the main ones was to pull Scotch broom from some of the plantings that the state had done from Gary Oaks. They worked on the garden here quite a bit. They painted the fence line that we put up last fall. So this is a team of about 12 high school seniors that have come up that are working in the area. Really a good deal. We got a grant for 1 week and Rotary paid for the second week. Mary Dodsworth has looked at having these folks come into parks also because it's a great learning experience for the youth, and you get a ton of work for a small amount of money because they're mostly paid for with grants. Here's what the garden area looked like when they got done. We've moved about 2 dump truck loads worth of chips that we had accumulated from the state chopping area, and we're starting to plant some indigenous plants there for that zone. This is the area along Phillips Road after we mowed it before the fence goes up. So you can see that it's basically, people had no idea what this big area was, what the field was. We put up a fence and it's got openings in a number of spots that are human friendly and animal friendly. We're not trying to keep people in or out, but we're trying to do is mark this area as a habitat wildlife area. And so this is a fence that the deer can jump over, the raccoons can climb through, but it does mark this area as a wildlife area, open to the public, free to be used. This is one of the benches along the walkway, fallen into great disrepair. And one of the projects has included adding new benches. And I'm happy to say we've had our local Lions Club has purchased a bench and installed one. Rotary has installed one. The Kiwanis of Steilacoom have installed that. It's actually becoming a very big community project. Here's the first bench going back in the week that the Northwest Youth Corps was here. And you can see these are put in with intent to be there for a long time. These are the same ones we use in the parks that are supposed to be 50 to 75-year benches. And they're put in concrete with a nice footing and a lovely view from this area. So here you can kind of get an idea looking out over the prairie land, how much prairie there is here in this piece of property. It's really a very unique and gorgeous site. A lot of bird watchers come out here. Here's the Youth Corps working in one of the Gary Oak plants that was done when they first converted this to an open space wildlife area. The state planted a number of Gary Oaks in 2 locations, and they're doing very well, except for they've been completely surrounded by Scotch broom that's as tall as they are. So one of the projects has been to pull that. This crew pulled 14 dump truck loads of Scotch broom right out of the ground. And these pullers that we use, you can see the roots of that. It eliminates the Scotch broom once and for all. Unfortunately, Scotch broom seeds, when they hit the ground, if they're fertile, can last up to 50 years. So it remains a project for the Prairie to completely keep those guys out of there. Here you can see what it looks like after they got done. A huge amount of work in this area that really improves it and turns it back to the prairie with oak savannas that it was originally. This is what the ADA trail looked like. You can see these trees have been trimmed up. We trimmed up all the trees up to about 6 or 8 feet so people can't hide under them. You can now see out to Phillips Road and in from Phillips Road to give people the feeling that they're not being able to be hidden in here. So we have no local homeless camps occurring in here anymore. The state originally had 6 cameras that were motion activated that they had on this site. And since we've adopted it and done our improvements on it, they have removed all but one because they're no longer getting tripped by people coming in after night. And once again, it's like we find in the parks. The more people that are using an area for the right purpose, the less people that use it for the wrong purpose. This is what the 88 paved trail looked like when we took over. Completely overgrown. You can see chunks of the sod that were scraped off this about half-mile of paved trail area. And there's what it looks like today when we got through working on it. It's an absolutely beautiful path through this prairie area right in the middle of Lakewood. You can walk down this and feel like you're totally alone. Here is, this weekend, the Kiwanis bench went in. This is the work crew working there. A couple of pictures of the garbage pickup. This weekend, we had a community work project there. In a COVID safe way, people would come in, check in, and we'd send them out to the 100-acre site with separate jobs where they could work with their family units. This is a scout troop in the lower right-hand side. We had 62 people sign in and did over 219 hours of work Saturday between 4:11 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. And fortunately, we had no rain. It rained as soon as we were done. So this is a really been a huge community project. We had Kiwanis there, Lions there, 3 different Rotary clubs. Pierce College students volunteered. We had people from JBLM come out and join us. Boy Scout troop, local neighbors came out that used this area. The Oak Brook Homeowners Association had several people show up. It's truly becoming quite a community project. And I think that's an indicator how much the community reveres and wants to keep this property and this piece of property for people in Lakewood to use. It's free. It's a giant big park we have that doesn't really cost the city of Lakewood anything. One of the ultimate goals is to restore the prairie. This is an example of some of the plants that we'd like to get started out in the grasslands as we eliminate the Scotch broom. We've already got lupin and a number of them started, and we plan to work with the Puyallup tribe to get some other starts for some of these plants to get them going back out in the prairie, so that this prairie represents what it was 200 years ago. People can come out and see what it really was like. And here's one of the other kickers that we've got here in Lakewood. We have, with the Parks Department, the City of Lakewood, City of University Place, and Pierce County, we have this Chambers Creek Canyon Trail that we're working on. And I know you all have been briefed on that before. The Lakewood access to that trail is right here off the end of Phillips Road, and it's nothing more than a dead-end road with no parking and an access to this amazing trail system that's going in over the next couple of years. So here's one thing that the city might consider doing that you need to keep in the back of your mind. We can link up with just a few blocks along here, the South Sound Wildlife Area, to the Chambers Creek Canyon project. And you can end up walking through open prairie lands, down through the forest savanna and into the creek, and all the way down to the estuary at Chambers Creek. That'll all be connected as one big recreational area for the people in the community. This is kind of a bird's eye view of what the canyon project's looking like as the bridges go into Kobayashi and where the trail is planning on going. So these two projects actually have a potential of linking up and creating an absolutely amazing experience for the people of Pierce County as a whole. Here's the people that are working on it now. We've got Rotaries, Kiwanis. It's truly become a tremendous community project that has been embraced by all of our service clubs. So that's the quick, short rundown for my council people. Do we have questions?
Any questions for Mr. Billingsley?
Just a quick
Mr. Whalen.
Just a quick one before I have to leave. Alan, thank you very much for the presentation. It's fantastic work. My question to you is, how do you find a group of volunteers who can draw a straight line and put up a concrete wall like that? It looked beautiful.
One of the challenges is to match the task to the individual. And we had everything Saturday from picking up garbage to installing that bench. So we've got a lot of skills with the people of Lakewood, and we just need to match those up.
It looked great. Thank you very much for your work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would second that. I used those same blocks to build a wall a few years ago, and I went out and bought a laser level and measured 1,500 times.
Beautiful.
It was. Any other questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Bulkey.
Thank you, Mayor. Say, Alan, thank you for the presentation, and thank you for your leadership personally and your group's leadership, and go back and tell them. I mean, this is fantastic. It was just the other day, and I did help that one time, but I know you've been out there a number of other times since then. And just the other day when my wife and I were driving by there with the new fence, we talked about how bad that old fence was, because we drove by it several times a day, and it was falling down, and it was kind of like chicken wire, and it was all rusted, and there was Scotch broom everywhere. And the changes in that have just been incredible. And I would note that the Hutloff cross country team has been using that area for a long time. So I'm sure they appreciate every improvement that goes in there whenever they get back and get to do cross country and track. I think the Hutloff teams would run in there because it's fairly close by and it's safe. There's no cars to deal with. I just want to mention a couple of things. I think the idea of trying to connect to the trail eventually is a great one. And I think that shows a lot of foresight. And I really appreciate you bringing in the Northwest Youth Corps. And and you might want to talk to the Pierce County Conservation District about if you're going to do some plants, because they're pretty good at figuring out what plants to, and the noxious weed guys could always tell you what weeds to pull. So those are two resources. The Pierce County Conservation District can sometimes help you with although it sounds like you've got a good partner with the tribe. But the Conservation District could help you with some of the native species that might work in there too. But great job.
They're on our list, and frankly, so is the Hutloff cross country team. They're on our volunteer list. We just can't use them until we get past this. But we've been in contact with them, and they want to come over and help. And then even if it's just run, with rubber gloves and a bucket and pick up cans and bottles, they will participate, because that's part of the education they're doing there too. And one of the other things that we're going to work on that you all may have an opportunity to assist us with your legislative agenda is to remove the Discover Pass requirement for this property. Right now, if you park there, you're supposed to have a Discover Pass on your vehicle. And there is precedence in the wildlife areas for communities to get that waived, several of them. And so that's going to be part of the project in the next 2 years, is to get the state to release the requirement to have a Discover Pass to park there, because that just opens it up more freely to the community. I buy a park pass. I'm a parks guy. I'm all about it. But I'm also about making sure that we get the maximum number of people using this area and not have a parking sticker limit someone from using this area just because they don't have a Discover Pass. And they're open to that discussion. So that's one of the things we'll work on through the winter and in the next year, because this is going to be a project going on for a number of years. We're going to adopt it at this area for at least another 2 years from Rotary. And I'm committed to it, for a long time, because I think this is a very important asset to our community.
So Alan, have you investigated the routes that would be needed to connect this area to the Chambers Bay Trail, for example? Or
absolutely, yeah. I've walked that all the time. I go down to the Chambers Creek Trail. I walk through the game farm, get back out onto Phillips, and walk down to the route. And it would require a little engineering, but basically, we put a paved wide zone down Phillips Road before they did the sidewalks it's a bicycles and pedestrian lane, and it's blacktop, not particularly expensive as compared to, curbs and sidewalks. And even something like that with the proper signage is all it takes. There'll be some right-of-way issues, to get 3 feet of roadway to do it, but it's a low traffic area. And I think it's something that is in the public's best interest too.
Any other questions?
Mr.
Farmer?
Mayor, I drove by the work party several times on Saturday. The parking lot was packed. It was just amazing. I was like craning my neck, trying not to get into an accident. It was amazing. So if somebody is not associated with the Rotary or a Lions group, how do they find out about the next work party?
You read the Suburban Times?
There's a lot going on in the Suburban Times. So
Yeah, well, we always put it in the Suburban Times.
Gotcha.
And I put a banner up that's 4 feet by 6 feet at the wildlife area for a month before to let people were knowing. And we had a family of 6 come join us just because they saw that banner, and we gave them one section of the garden. So you guys weed this garden. And they had everything from a stroller to a 14-year-old there, and they did their work together as a family and had a good time and didn't get rained on. So we have something for everybody there.
That's awesome. And I love the idea of connecting the two trails. I live right around the corner on that, not very highly trafficked, but people go really fast down there.
Yeah.
And so it would be good to, obviously we can't do anything that's separated, but it would be nice to have some delineation because people do try and walk as long as they're paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
Great job.
Yep. Okay.
Any other questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Mary.
Hi,
Mrs.
thank you,
Mon.
Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation on the parks. I went to that park many years ago and I haven't been back, but I'm excited to see all the improvement, and I will be going back and taking friends with me. So thank you so much for that.
Good.
And what's your contact for JBLM volunteers?
We actually got contacted by them through the Steilacoom Kiwanis. So I have a contact there now, that's somebody who is connected with the Kiwanis. And so once again, as the project spreads out, people know people that know people, and it's just being embraced by so many different groups that it's getting big. My email list is now about 100 names.
So if you were dealing with the Steilacoom Kiwanis, you probably got MPs. But Lakewood's Community Connector, the 4-2 Striker Brigade, is from time to time looking for or regress. That's what happens when you get old. From time to time, we're looking for community projects in Lakewood, and that's not exclusively city projects, and so they may be available. So contact the city the next time you're looking for volunteers, and we can pass that along to them.
Absolutely, we'll do that because this is a city project, but it's open up. This area is open to anybody that wants to drive in and use it. And we have bird watchers come down from Seattle and up from Olympia to watch some of the birds we've got going on in here. We had a bald eagle nest just about 100 yards off the property this year. You could watch the nest get built and then bald eagles hatch and fly around. It was really something.
So yeah, so they poaching at the hatchery?
Not anymore. They've got it pretty well sealed. And also they've taken a different spin to the hatchery. It used to be all outside pens for the fish and all. Now they're all inside now. And so most of those concrete pens and culverts are all just abandoned.
All right, anything else from council? Well, thank you for your leadership, your group for all its fine efforts. And I know we're on an individual basis anxious to go and see the progress as it works forward. So thanks again.
Thank you.
And great presentation. I look forward to it spreading throughout the community so that people can enjoy it.
We'll have more on it later. I appreciate all the things you guys do as our council. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And we move to The next item of business, which is review of the 2021-22 federal legislative priorities, state legislative agenda and policy manual, and the Pierce County policy manual. So we are starting with Ms. Kelly Fong. Greetings.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Like the mayor just said, we are going to be talking about our federal legislative priorities, our state legislative agenda and manual, and then our Pierce County policy manual this evening. I know typically we do this as a Saturday retreat, so this will be kind of a first here on a Monday night. I'd like to invite in tonight Jake Johnston of the Johnston Group. And he's going to kick this off by starting to talk about our federal legislative priorities. I know in the past we've started with the state, but this year we're going to start with our federal priorities. And this starts on your packet on page 38.
Good evening, Jake. You have the floor, but you're muted.
Opportunity to talk to you. I think if you've got the draft agenda in front of you, what I'd like to do is kind of quickly walk through some of the issues that we are continuing, give you an update on some of our actions in DC right now, and then take any questions you collectively have. I think a short synopsis of our work right now, or our agenda heading into next year, is to continue some of the work that we've been doing for a while, and frankly, build on some significant progress that's been made this year. I'm happy to take any questions that you have along the way. Feel free just to raise a hand. But I'd really like to give a more detailed update on 4 key issues, which also set the foundation for our agenda heading into next year. The first and the most important one is our request for local government funding from the federal government in response to the COVID pandemic. This has been something that's been a focus of ours since spring of this year. And we have seen the House put money into a version of a relief bill that would have benefited the city and allowed the city to recoup some of its lost sales tax revenue from that era. But unfortunately, that bill has not made it into law. And it looks at this point as if the negotiations on that bill are done for the year. There's a last gasp effort underway right now, but it's nobody in DC is betting money on that coming true before the election. The COVID bill is a little bit of an if-then game, depending on the results of the election. If Joe Biden wins the presidency, and if the Democrats have control of the Senate, we can expect to see before the end of February a COVID response bill out of Congress. And in that, both parties have kind of staked their claim to supporting funding for local governments in that bill. Unfortunately, right now, there's opposition to that effort from Senate Republicans, and the White House has not been really clear in terms of where their support is coming in on this issue. If the team in charge right now remains in charge heading into the new year, I think our chances to see support back to the city's general fund to replace the revenues that have been lost is unlikely to prevail. I think that's just the dynamic at this point. So we are waiting for the results of the election. I can stop for questions on each one of these, or I can just plow through as you see fit. Plow through, says the mayor. Which brings us to the next one, which is our transportation efforts. So the city has been advocating to make sure that medium-sized cities have access to federal transportation programs. And this year we worked an amendment on both the transportation bill that the House passed and on the appropriations process to do exactly that. Mr. Larson drafted an amendment that was co-sponsored by Mr. Heck, Mr. Kilmer, Ms. Jayapal, Ms. Del Bene, and a few other people throughout the country. Regrettably, we were unsuccessful in that effort, but part of what we did get is we got a coalition working of 16 cities here in Washington state that are kind of collectively working together in response on this issue and working with a delegation to push it forward. We're evaluating our strategy since we were unable to get that across the finish line this year and looking to see what kind of changes to our approach we need to make heading into next year. Which brings us to the Defense Community Infrastructure Program. The city of Lakewood is directly responsible for this program being created. And this is an infrastructure program that allows the Department of Defense to give grants to communities, to military communities, to build infrastructure to support military installations. This bill was enacted 2 years ago and funded last year. And this year, the program was set up at the Department of Defense, and the first round of applications were put forward, including the city of Lakewood applying for funding to complete the Washington Boulevard project. Our project was ranked among the highest in the application pool. There were 70 some odd projects put forward for funding out of a fund of $50 million. And OEA did forward our project on to the Office of the Secretary of Defense for an award. But OSD selected 13 projects out of the 30 some that were forwarded on, and we were unsuccessful kind of in that screening criteria. Of the 13 projects that were funded, not one fits the infrastructure definition that we believe should be in place. They are military quality of life projects, which are critically important, but they are things like daycare centers and child support and other kind of amenities that serve military families and communities, as opposed to core infrastructure needed to support the bases themselves. In response to that, we have once again asked that the DSIP program be amended and funded in a way that meets our priorities and our requests. And so I'm pleased to tell you that we had an amendment put forward in the Defense Authorization Bill this year that was adopted by the House of Representatives, and it is currently in the bill that has passed the House. The Senate has not yet acted on that bill this year, and it's expected that negotiations will conclude following the election in a lame duck session. And that's where we stand right now. We've got an amendment in that bill that would make sure that infrastructure is prioritized, that the cost share in that is affordable for cities, especially in a COVID and an economic kind of area that we're all in right now, and that we see infrastructure projects get funded in the next round of DSIP funding.
Hey, Jake, could you detail a little bit about the definition as passed by the House? Realizing that virtually everything went through a quality of life. If you had a rec center or a swimming pool, you were in great shape, maybe even the library, but no roads, bridges, or power lines. So what's the new definition if that change is made?
Well, we're actually trying to carve out a whole separate category, and we've done this in the House bill. So the city of Lakewood commented when the program was being set up. And in fact, our delegation thought that those comments were exactly how the program should be set up. So our comments in terms of what we want were the foundation for the amendment being created. The amendment reflects that. What it means specifically, Mayor, is that projects will fall into two categories: military quality of life, military family issues, and then core infrastructure, meaning roads and healthcare and utility infrastructure, and these kind of hard cost issues that are municipal responsibilities, but only necessary because of the impact of military installations. The cost share dynamic will be different in those two categories. It will be capped at 30. There will be a 30% ceiling for a local cost share on the federal side for the infrastructure programs, and a 50% for the military quality of life. And the reason for that is simply just the cost of the projects. A lot of the awards that were given over here on the quality of life were $1 million projects, $2 million projects, and the 50% cost match was achievable. But the Washington Boulevard project was a $10 million request. And so obviously a 30% in an economic dynamic that we're operating in is a much more achievable number, not just for us, but for other communities as well. A couple of quick points on this as well. The city of Lakewood was supported extraordinarily well by Pierce County in this regard. We worked hand in hand with the county's federal lobbyist, and it was just a really great partnership. Pierce County supported this effort, as did Kitsap County. The city of Bremerton, Snohomish County got involved, some other folks as well. But I just want you all to know as a council that the city of Lakewood was kind of in the driver's seat in terms of the strategy and the tactics on this, and Pierce County was absolutely there in a supporting role.
Hey, Jake.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to do too much of a post-mortem on the original bill, but you know, we spent a lot of time and effort and therefore money and staff time and flying people back and various things like that, kind of running interference for this whole thing. And then at the end of the day, it goes to quality of life projects, right? To a large extent. So I feel like, explain to me why we weren't snookered on this deal. Like, hey, let's do this together. You go first. We did the effort. We made the effort. We spent the money, which is, you know, we've done this in other areas of our city. And then here comes the awards and we're nowhere to be found. So and tell me why, and after you explain that, then tell me why on this amendment cycle, we won't get snookered again.
So I'm going to answer your questions in reverse order. On the amendment cycle, if we're successful, we'll have statutory protection for the specific language that we want to see in the law, which dictates how this money can be spent. So if we're successful on the amendment, we feel pretty good that a portion of the dollars in that program will be made on a competitive basis for infrastructure projects that won't compete directly with military quality of life projects. Your first question, though, and frankly the bigger one, is a little bit more nuanced. The answer is, at a technical level, at the OEA level, the Office of Economic Adjustment, where we have been, I think the city's got a phenomenal relationship with OEA, kind of at a regional and at a DC level. We were among the highest scoring projects that came through the door. They were expecting us, they were prepped for us, and as a result, our project was selected for being forwarded on. And so at a technical level, we succeeded. But the decision was not made at a technical level. It was made at a political level within OSD. And I think that you can look at the awards of the 13 projects that were awarded, and you can draw a direct correlation between a perception that some of those projects are in states that are more favorable to this administration and other states that are not. And I regret maybe that wasn't the case, but there were 2 projects awarded in North Dakota and none in the state of Washington.
Any other questions for Jake? Well, thank you for all your efforts in this challenging environment. And maybe someday we'll get to go back and strong arm in person again.
Shannon or John, did I miss anything that you wanted me to cover?
Actually, Jake, could you maybe talk about the after action meeting that we're going to have with, we're trying to coordinate with the OEA right now.
Yeah, so Councilman, I think to your point as well, we've requested a formal kind of after action review with OEA to understand how our grant application was perceived and kind of also if there's any way that we could put it in a stronger position moving forward. I think we have our suspicions about that we have a great project that fits a critical need. We have our suspicions that we need to wait for a new funding cycle and frankly, some better direction from Congress on this. Having said that, we're going to go through the steps though and make sure that we are crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. I will say one other thing as well. The amendment is not just an amendment that's going to be offered in the future. It's an amendment that was offered on the Authorization Committee and then again on the Appropriations Committee. It was supported on a bipartisan basis coming out of the House with support from committee members in both parties. It has the support of the Armed Services Committee Chair, Adam Smith, who understands the needs of JBLM, and it also had the support of Nita Lowy, who is the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee. So again, we've got it's in the only bill that's passed at this point. And I think Congress was pretty upset to see the direction that the administration took with the actual awards versus what original congressional intent was. And that's the delta that we're operating in the moment. And recognizing we're in a public meeting, I will refrain from further comment.
You have something further, John? Mr. Caulfield? Okay. Because it's a public meeting, he's holding his peace. Well, thanks again, Jake. We appreciate all your help, and we look forward to you moving this big stone up the hill. So thanks. Back to Ms. Kelly Fong, I understand. So.
It's like Councilmember Branstetter might have had a question or hand raised.
Oh. Mr. Branstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had one thing that I'd like Mr. Johnson's view on with respect to the North Clear Zone. And we were successful in getting a multi-year commitment for a significant amount of dollars that primarily came out of Air Force pockets, I guess, to do that. But is there a congressional legislative emphasis and actions that need to be taken to make sure that that doesn't evaporate?
It's a great question. And I apologize for glossing over a lack of a report on the clear zone. The fact of the matter is the work that SSMCP has done, the work that the city has done for years with the Army, with the Air Force, with OEA, and with your delegation, and the result being this plan with money attached to it, is the result of, frankly, a lot of years of really hard work. And it's a roadmap, and it's a roadmap for how we move forward. So the role of Congress in this is twofold. It's number one, to keep parties accountable to the roadmap that's been laid out. And then number two, to break down some ongoing, let's call them problems that may exist for the Air Force to obligate some money in terms of fulfilling kind of their obligation in this process as well. We're doing that through making sure that encroachment relief strategies are definitions that are included in the revisions to the defense authorization bill that are going forward. We're making sure that if there is a future BRAC round, which there inevitably has to be, that BRAC money can be used also to fix encroachment issues on projects that get plussed up, not just going to communities where infrastructure is being plussed down. This remains kind of a key highlight for us and a key priority for us, but also the unbelievable work that's been done kind of in the community and within the region have really created a framework where everybody's marching up to the same sheet right now. The delegation's job is to fund the Air Force requests and then to also make sure that everybody's accountable to what they said they'd do.
Okay. That in past BRAC processes have plans such as the one that we have been valued in those evaluations?
Make sure I understand your question right. Has the encroachment problem at JBLM been a factor in previous?
Not the problem. I'm saying that if you have a BRAC, it does. Are we going to be in a stronger position because we have a plan? Then we might just, but having not yet brought it to fruition.
Without any question whatsoever. We are in a stronger position as a result of this plan. We're in a stronger position having an agreement and a letter of understanding between the two service branches. We're in a stronger position because there's an actual kind of tiered plan for how the money will be spent in a sequential way. And we're in a stronger position because all the parties, the county, the city, SSMCP, the Air Force, the Army, everybody's on the same page. And just to make sure we go even one step further, when the secretaries of both those agencies come before the House and the Senate, we've got our delegation is asking them on the record in those processes to reaffirm their support for this process. That happened this year on the Defense Authorization Bill, where Adam Smith made it a key issue for both service branches. And actually, Senator Cantwell did as well over on the Senate side. So we continue to play that role kind of in this fight and in this issue.
All right. Well, thank you. And you know, I appreciate that role is there because it's, as Mr. Boki talked about earlier, a lot of effort that doesn't get to the finish line is not always well received. Thank you.
All right, anyone else? Wave at me or forever hold your peace. Well, thanks, Jake. We'll see you next time. Sure,
Thank you, everybody.
Work on this. Back to Ms. Kelly Fong.
I'd like to now invite Brianna Murray and Shelley Helder of Gordon Thomas Honeywell to come in and talk about the state legislative agenda and manual.
Good evening. You're on mute, Shelley. I turned my video on, but didn't turn my microphone on. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I am Shelley Helder, your State Government Affairs Consultant, and I'm joined this evening by Brianna Murray, Vice President at Gordon Thomas Honeywell Government Affairs. And together we are the city's representation in Olympia. And we've had the pleasure of working with the city for many years now, and we're excited about the year ahead, which is sure to bring more uncertainties and challenges, but we're excited about it. So I'm going to turn it over to Brianna to provide an overview of what we're planning to cover tonight and some background on what to expect for the upcoming legislative session. And then I'll review the city's draft legislative priorities. So Brianna, over to you. Great. Thank you, Shelley, and good evening, Mayor and Council. As Shelley mentioned, our discussion tonight is we're going to start with a background on the 2021 legislative session. We're just going to charge right through, and so I will look for the raise hand function. If you have a question, we'll pause at that time, but otherwise we're just going to charge right through all of this, and we'll take questions at the end. So as we're looking at the 2021 legislative session, there's a fair amount of uncertainty all around. Earlier this year, there were several different stakeholders and legislators asking for a special session to be convened. It seems unlikely that a special session will be convened prior to January. However, it is still uncertain. If a special session is convened, it would be after the November election, and it would be very narrow in scope and probably for a limited amount of time. That said, the regular session is scheduled to begin on January 11th. It is a long session and the first year of the legislative biennium. And so it is a time when the legislature will focus on developing their biennial budgets. The format of the session is undetermined, whether or not it will be virtual or in person. Our sense is that it will be partially, if not exclusively, virtual, but that there will still continue to be some components that are in person. What the impact of that will likely be is that if they need to get consensus using a virtual format, it will make it harder and harder for them to pass as many bills into law, meaning the scope of issues that will be discussed and considered seriously will be far more narrow than what we would typically see. Democrats are expected to maintain the majority in the House and the Senate. We're seeing a mix of wins and losses for both parties in the November elections, or anticipated in the November elections. And we think that adds up to Democrats maintaining the majority.
There's a significant revenue shortfall in the operating and transportation budgets. So a lot of legislative energy will be focused on those two budgets, and then there's revenue available on the capital budget. We'll go into that a bit more on the next slide. And we're beginning to see the policy issues that are emerging as hot topics that are likely to fall within that narrower scope of issues that they will be considering. There's a lot of legislative attention being given to police reform right now. There's over 60 different proposals that are under discussion by various legislators. Housing and rental assistance, as well as assistance to mortgage holders to avoid foreclosure, will be highly discussed. And then equity proposals throughout all of the state's institutions are also emerging policy areas of concern. But the focus will really be on the budgets. So to dive into those a little bit more, on the operating budget, you'll recall that the operating budget funds all state agency operations. The state is looking at a revenue shortfall within the operating budget of $4 billion over the next 4 years. Earlier this year, that number was forecasted to be $7 billion, but revenues are coming in better than anticipated. Things are continuing to even out or increase through the COVID-19 pandemic, so it's not looking as bad as was previously feared. That said, legislators have been very clear that they have no intention of doing an all cuts budget, or at least the Democrat Party. So they will be focused not just on budget cuts, but also on new revenue. So that would be looking at an increase in marijuana tax and liquor tax, potential changes to the B&O tax, and discussion around new revenue sources like capital gains tax and payroll tax, things along those lines. It's unclear how all of that will shake out at this point. The capital budget is funded with bonds that are paid off by a percentage of the operating budget. So it has a steady stream of revenue coming into it, is anticipated to be between $2.5 and $3 billion. And they'll focus their investments with that money on projects that stimulate the economy or support vulnerable populations, particularly impacted through the COVID-19 pandemic. And then the third budget is the transportation budget. The transportation budget is facing the most significant shortfall out of the three. The shortfall in the transportation budget is caused not just by a reduced gas tax and toll revenues through the pandemic, but also by the $30 car tab initiative I-976 that voters approved in November of 2019. Discussions around a revenue package for filling the transportation shortfall began in 2019. They continued throughout the 2020 legislative session, and they're becoming more imminent and urgent in the recent months. We saw a formal proposal out of the Senate. In the House, we did not see a formal proposal around a revenue package, but the House Transportation Committee Chair is in the process of holding listening sessions to get feedback, and he plans to release a formal proposal later this fall. The conversation around a transportation revenue package is increasingly linked to climate policy. Historically, the transportation budget has been primarily funded with gas tax. However, legislators seem to be recognizing that gas tax is a declining revenue source. So they're looking at new revenue options, and cap and trade and carbon tax are some of the revenue options that they're looking at that seem to have a lot of political support. In addition to that, several dozen legislators signed a letter last session that said they would not approve a transportation revenue package unless a low carbon fuel standard was put in place. A low carbon fuel standard would result in an increase in the cost of gas, but wouldn't generate any increase in revenue. So there's a lot of conversation about how a low carbon fuel standard fits in with either a cap and trade or carbon tax system to then develop an overall revenue stream for transportation projects. So that's a bit of background on, my apologies. I skipped through some slides there. That's some overall background on this upcoming legislative session. We do want to focus the bulk of our time in talking about your legislative agenda. And I'm going to turn it over to Shelley here in a minute to dive into the drafts that you have in your packet. But before I do, I just want to offer a few reminders on how to develop a successful legislative agenda. You all have been great about following our advice and guidance. And as a result, I think the city's been very successful as we've advocated in Olympia. So just to reiterate, we go over these every year, but I strongly encourage you all to be focused, and this year even more so, very hyper-focused on your top legislative priorities, recommending 4 to 6 items, and that those 4 to 6 items include a focus on your capital and transportation requests. Also encourage you to focus on items that effectively use your political capital and match the political climate that we're expecting to be in. In other words, please don't ask us to spend a lot of time on something that has no chance ever of passing. And then finally, it oftentimes takes several years for us to accomplish a legislative objective. And so consistency from one year to the next really helps us really keep after long-term objectives and be able to deliver for you. So with that guidance in mind, I will turn it over to Shelley to start going over the draft legislative agenda. And I think we need to do a screen swap here. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Shannon, I think you're bringing up the draft agenda.
Great. So like Brianna said, I'm going to walk through each of the city's top legislative priorities. And to do that, we'll be following the draft legislative agenda, which you see on the screen here. It's also on page 9 of your council packet. So I'm going to briefly describe each priority, and then I'll pause for questions and discussion on that item, and then we'll move on to the next topic. So just to start, I want to note that this is a biennial legislative agenda, and that's to align with the state's biennial budget cycle. So this is the same structure that the city has used in the past. And when we're successful in the first year of the biennium, then we amend the legislative agenda for the second year of the biennium. So the first item you see there is Lakewood Landing, and it's a request for economic development financing for Lakewood Landing. We've been working on this particular item for a few years now, and last year we nearly got it across the finish line with the reauthorization of the Local Revitalization Financing Program, or LRF. Unfortunately, LRF is no longer politically viable due to the state's budget challenges. So we're pivoting strategies this year, and we're going to focus on 2 possibilities. The first is authorization of tax increment financing, which does not have an impact on the state's budget. And the second option is to pursue opportunities in revenue raising proposals, whether that's for the transportation budget or for the operating budget. As Brianna just mentioned, both of those budgets are facing shortfalls, and so legislators are going to be looking at new revenue sources to fund the backfill. We will be looking for opportunities to see if there is a way to incorporate a financing strategy into one of those proposals. So the language that you see in this document is intentionally flexible so that we can respond to the opportunities that we see that may arise. Just one note on the tax increment financing priority or possibility. We are coordinating with the Association of Washington Cities and the Washington Ports Association, who have also identified it as a priority legislative request for the upcoming session. It's just still a little early at this time to know how likely it is for that particular policy to pass, given the narrow scope that the legislature is going to be focused on for the upcoming session. So I will pause there and see if there are any questions about this item.
And while folks are thinking of their questions, I want to provide an example of the sort of budget opportunity that we might be looking for. So for example, if there is a transportation revenue package, this project, the development of Lakewood Landing and the relocation of the WashDOT maintenance facility stands to benefit WashDOT. So there's a nexus to transportation. In the back of that revenue package, we could authorize either a local revitalization financing or a tax increment financing pilot program specifically for Lakewood Landing that would fit within the title and the scope of that transportation revenue package. So that's the type of creative ideas and things that we're looking at inserting into various revenue proposals as they're developed.
So I'm not seeing any questions.
Don't see any hands up, so next subject.
Okay, great. So the next item on the agenda is the Western State Hospital Community Partnership Program. So we've asked for funding for the Western State Hospital Community Partnership Program since 2007, and we've been successful every time we've asked. A few years back, we requested an increase to the appropriation, and that was granted. This year, we're asking for that same amount, the $621,000, to be included in the state's biennial operating budget. And I just want to note that though we have been very successful in this area in the past, we do anticipate this to be a challenging request this coming year for two reasons. One, Brianna mentioned the state's operating budget shortfall. And two, there is heightened attention on police reform and just general policing models. So you may notice that the community partnership program has also been referred to as a community policing program. Sometimes those terms are interchangeable with this. So we are focusing on it being the community partnership program, focusing on really the safety and investigation that is done at Western State. The other thing that I wanted to add here is that we've already begun advancing this priority by submitting a letter to DSHS requesting that they include this funding in their agency budget. And we'll be making a similar request of the governor as he develops his proposed operating budget. So I will pause there and see if there's any questions.
Questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah. In the past, there was one cycle of where we made some efforts to try to not have to have this be a priority every single biennium, but to get this program funded in a somewhat permanent recurring basis that didn't require a special attention of the legislature every year. And I noticed that that's not a strategy you mentioned this year, but that does seem like we would like that to be an ultimate goal so that we don't have to spend this level of energy on it every single biennium. Is there a road that leads in that direction?
That's a great question, Councilmember Branstetter. So a couple things that I'll respond to regarding that topic. So you are correct. And we actually tried to codify funding for this program for a couple sessions and realized that there was not going to be a path forward. And there are a couple reasons why. One, the state was and still is to an extent restructuring the way that they provide mental health services. And so there was a question for a while about what the population was going to, be served at Western State Hospital, and if there was even going to be a future need for this type of program. There was a question about how many people were going to be at Western State Hospital and if this level of funding should be included in statute. I think ultimately what it came down to is the legislature does not like to make decisions for future legislatures. They don't want to bind future lawmakers to decisions that they are making in current circumstances. And of course, that sounds a little silly because that's what they do every year when they consider legislation and pass it. But in particular, it seemed very evident that this item was going to be challenging given the current state of Western State Hospital and just DSHS's. There are a lot of things that are in flux, I guess is the best way to put it. And so putting something like this in statute has not been well received. I don't know, Brianna, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
No, I mean, I think it boils down to wanting to use your political capital as a city as effectively as possible. And there's just not a path forward at this time to get a bill along those lines passed.
Any other hands? I see none. So.
Okay, moving on. The next item is a capital budget request. So as Brianna mentioned at the beginning, this coming session, the legislature is going to be inclined to prioritize projects that support the most vulnerable. And we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of that opportunity and make sure that some of those investments come back to the Lakewood community. So the city is partnering with Living Access Support Alliance to request $500,000 from the capital budget to help expand their facilities in Lakewood. And of course, on the document here, there's a lot more detail, but I think just for simplicity's sake, I will leave it at that and see if there are any questions.
Yeah, I do. I didn't have the opportunity to review the detail on that. What is the total value of the projects that is proposed and what does it add?
Mayor, this is John, the city manager. Could I call on Dave Bueller to maybe give an update on that, since him and his team have been speaking with LASA, and I know he has a meeting with them on Wednesday.
And let me tell you my concern, and maybe that'll focus the question. Because my former law firm was involved in part of the financing, I was not able to voice my concerns when I had to recuse myself when we earlier funded part of their project, if I recall correctly, they ended up at about $600 a square foot. They have more than one program, but that project was billed as emergency housing. Now it says emergency housing or rapid rehousing. It actually is probably closer on that project in Lakewood. It's probably closer to permanent supportive housing because they really don't have any turnover. That's the most expensive way to help people. And so I'm concerned that we may be contributing to something, if we're not careful, something akin to California, where the new homeless housing units are over $500,000 a piece. And I'm in favor of spending the state's capital money and our human services money on housing assistance. But if we're going to spend $500,000 and we get 2 new 800 square foot units, I don't think that's the way we want to go. So with that, Mr. Bueller, you can show me why I'm wrong.
Well, they're good questions. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. These are good questions. LASA currently has a proposal to expand their site onto an existing parcel.
Now we can't hear you very well. You're breaking up.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm getting these crazy signals on my machine. I'll try to go ahead and ignore them. LASA is proposing to expand the operation onto an existing parcel. And so they have made an application to Pierce County to go ahead and do that. However, they've also indicated that they have some other desires to expand elsewhere in the general vicinity. They do not have a clear defined master plan for their long-term intentions. And so that's a bit of an issue. We have a meeting with LASA on Wednesday, Mr. Gum, in which case we will be reviewing them with them what the city is looking at and the need for them to come forward with some sort of overall capital plan in the future. They are not thinking long-term at the moment, and we are trying to ask that they do so in an effort so that we can fund them with CDBG, home funds, and other funds as they become available. So I would say that there's some hesitancy here, but we are trying to work with them to see if we can't move forward.
Have they given you a general idea of what scope of their intended expansion is? Or which element of, is this emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, or permanent supportive housing?
I do not know, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, with the general goal of LASA expanding services, you know, I'm okay with requesting $500,000 of state money to be able to do that, even if exactly the nature of that expansion is still under development. I am concerned, though, in our narrative about there is the sentence that says the city is committed to providing $150,000 in 2020 and up to $300,000 in 2021 and 22 to help LASA expand. And I'm wondering about, have we really done that? Has there been some council action to actually align with that sentence? You know, or are we, if we haven't, are we setting ourselves up of where we need to do it? And whether there's a chicken or the egg thing out there, do we have to do that up front to even make this request? Like what it looks like by putting it in that narrative? I would rather not see that sentence there, or have something that doesn't have dollar amounts to it if we haven't actually approved by council action any specific dollar amounts in any budgets that we've approved.
Mr. Caulfield.
Thank you, Mayor. In response to Councilmember Branstetter, so that funding right there, that is going to be proposed as part of the 21-22 biennial budget that I'll be introducing to the mayor and the city council a week from today. And the funding source will be CDBG and home funds, which is consistent with your policies as outlined in your recently adopted 5-year consolidated plan for 2020 to 2025.
And you feel we're ready to do that, even given Mr. Buer's uncertainty about what LASA expanding really looks like?
At this point in time, Councilmember Branstetter, I do. It comes down to the to the chicken and egg. And I think by the city putting up and committing these funds, shows that the city is a willing and able partner. Also, LASA is going to need to be an equal partner here in, requesting these monies as well. So, so again, the short answer is yes, absolutely.
Mr. Simpson.
Well, I'm certainly supportive of spending those monies in this area. The question is to whether the LASA expansion is the most impactful way to spend them in the next biennium is, I think, a question that we need to know the answer to before we obligate it. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor. I guess if we're going to leave that sentence in there for now, assuming that we do approve it in our budget before the end of the year.
Okay. Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is for Mr. Buer. If I understood you correctly, Dave, we're willing to partner with LASA. We're willing to work with LASA, but LASA has not made its intentions clear to us. And since our legislative delegation there is suggesting that we remain focused for 21 and 22, are we really doing ourselves any favors by leaving this on our request list?
Mayor, may I offer a comment?
Ms. Murray.
Thank you. So one thing that we have historically done is we've identified capital funding requests in each legislative district, and we have tried to listen to feedback that we've gotten from our legislative delegation. So while we need to remain very focused, I think this project is one, it's in the 29th, and it aligns with some of the feedback that we've been getting from our legislators in that district about the type of projects they'd like to see us bring forward. So I think it is a good opportunity for us to have a good partnership on a project that in an area that they're looking for us to bring forward.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Farmer.
I'm supportive of a project like this. I particularly think it's important that we put forward projects that show a strong connection to people, particularly people in need. As our government relation folks are telling us, that's a big priority this year. So I think it's wise to capitalize on that. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything in the packet. Each of the projects that we're focused on has a backgrounder, a 1 to 2 page backgrounder, but the LASA request doesn't. Is that in the works, or is that maybe I was just curious about that.
I can answer that question. So yeah, thanks for noticing that. We do not have a LASA 1-pager in the works, and that's primarily because it's a priority that we're partnering with a nonprofit on. We want to make sure that there's buy-in from them, and so there may be a 1-pager that we develop in conjunction with them, but we wanted to make sure that it wasn't a solely city-led 1-pager.
Thank you.
Mr. Bulkey.
Along the lines of the LASA request, for either Bianna or Shelley, what is the likelihood of another type of funding source? I'm thinking along the lines of the last one we had, and I can't remember the sales tax rebate or whatever you want to call it that we had that we've agreed to receive here as a city. Are they discussing new funding sources for housing, which would help LASA on their portion.
So Councilmember Boki, I think you're referring to House Bill 1406 that provided a credit against the state sales tax for
Yeah.
local jurisdictions to invest in housing.
Thank you.
So I don't think, so what, first, the price tag on 1406 for the operating budget was significant. And given the revenue shortfall within the operating budget, I don't see them providing a similar type of tool this next session. The type of tools that we're more likely to see is probably a more direct investment through like a housing trust fund grant program or something along those lines, but probably not a direct conduit of funds that LASA would necessarily receive in a direct appropriation style like we see in the capital budget. And then the other thing that I'd anticipate they'll be considering is local option revenue sources so that you can locally increase taxes for housing purposes, with which some jurisdictions, not necessarily yours, but some jurisdictions have expressed an interest in.
Okay, thank you.
Don't see anyone with their hand up here, so can move on to Wards Lake Park.
Okay. So in addition to the capital budget request for LASA, we're also making 2 capital budget requests for parks. Both requests are for $250,000. The first is for Wards Lake Park, which is in the 29th district, and the second is American Lake Park in the 28th district. Both projects focus on kind of a theme of improving access to the parks. So at Wards Lake, the focus is on improving park amenities. So it will be a more attractive destination for a neighborhood that otherwise has really limited access to open space. And then at American Lake Park, the focus is on improvements for ADA access, particularly to the shoreline and the boat launch. So we've recommended that we kind of frame these projects in this way. I think that generally speaking, as we mentioned earlier, capital budget is the more robust budget of the 3. But the state is going to be looking to prioritize projects that are construction ready and that benefit the vulnerable. So parks projects will have to compete really well in order to be successful in this coming session. So we think framing it this way, as well as the $250,000 is the right approach to make these projects the most competitive. So I will stop there and see if there's any questions about either Wards Lake Park or American Lake Park improvements.
Questions from council? Seeing none.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, can I just make one comment on the American Lake Park summary and the 1-pager? I think we could slightly strengthen it by noting that the city has spent some amount of money, is spending some amount of money to increase the availability of parking at that park, to include, I believe, increasing the number of handicap parking spaces in the reoriented parking lot. And if that's the case, that might be a comment that could be inserted in the 1-pager anyway, that might add some strength.
All right. Now move
Mr.
on.
Mayor?
Yes.
I do have a question. Thank you. On the Wards Lake Park improvements, I noticed that it does talk about very first, right off the bat, talks about improving safety. And I see more about environmental health disparities and environmental and health disparities, which I have no doubt that there are, but I'm curious, is safety, public safety, or what kind of safety, is that an issue, or is it more the other?
So I think one of the safety aspects that the improvements are hoping to make is safer access. So I think the entrance to the park right now, I think there's only one entrance. This would create that I think a second entrance so that it would be easier to access for pedestrians. I think parking lot is proposed to be kind of restructured so that it's safer for people who are coming in from the parking lot. And then I think there's also something called, and I'm going to really butcher the name, so I'm sorry, Mary Dodsworth, if you're listening, but it's basically designing a park in a way that mitigates for unsafe activity. So it's designing a park in a way to improve safety. And that's what this park master plan has gone through. I don't know if Ms. Kelly Fong has anything else to add to that, but I would defer to her if there's something that I've missed.
I think, Shelley, I think you did a really good overview, and I think you channeled Ms. Dodsworth really well. It's crime prevention through environmental design. So it's a lot of features to kind of like help open up spaces so you have clearer eyesights, to increase, populations in areas so you have more eyes. Elements like that are going to be designed into this park. As Shelley mentioned, there are going to be improvements to the main entryway. Currently, it's kind of hard to access, so they will be doing some improvements there in addition to several other park access points that are currently unsanctioned, making them sanctioned entrances.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Farmer, is your hand still up? Do you have anything?
Yep, that was me. I'm done. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll lower my hand.
All right, we'll move on to capital budget requests. And next, well, I guess the transportation request.
Yes. So as Brianna previously mentioned, transportation revenue is going to be challenging this coming session. So we've been bringing forward this request for funding for a multimodal transportation study for the last 2 years, and we haven't had much success. However, this coming year, there are 2 things that could change that. First, there are discussions of a transportation revenue package, which means there could be additional funding for the legislature to appropriate. And secondly, we're recommending that we frame this request as a regional request to highlight that Lakewood is not going to be the only beneficiary from this work. And that's reflected in the 1-pager in your packet that shows the logos of all the different entities that support this request. That being said, the success of this priority is dependent on the passage of a revenue package, which at this time is uncertain. So I'll pause there to see if there's any questions on this topic, and then I just have a few closing comments.
Questions from council? Ms. Farmer.
So I hope this doesn't sound like a dumb question, but multimodal, this and that, what's a practical application? More bus stops, more bus lines, more transit, more Uber stops? What are we talking?
Great, good question. Yes, so multimodal typically includes bikes, pedestrians, buses, trains, basically just like it sounds, multiple modes of travel. What we're thinking this particular report could look at, and the reason that we're framing it that way is because we don't want to, pigeonhole the report into a certain outcome, but we're wanting the state to consider the investments that are being made by Sound Transit along the corridor. We already have a sounder station in Lakewood. We know that there's going to be another station eventually in Tillicum and then in DuPont. And so we want to make sure that investment and then the investments that the state is making for grade separated crossings over those, over the train tracks at certain intersections, that those are not lost investments. That if there's some type of additional pedestrian, additional passenger rail service that could be offered, that is considered. So that is one of the modes of transportation that would be considered.
Thank you. One last question. Is this the second year it's been in a legislative request?
Yes. Well, no, this would make it the third year. We've requested it the last 2 years. And so the third year, but as I mentioned at the beginning, the city structures their legislative agendas to be biennial in nature. So the last 2 years that it's been on the legislative agenda is just because it was on the biennial list of priorities, and it wasn't accomplished in the first year of the biennium.
And I'll also add on that the good work that Shelley has done, as well as a lot of work by other city staff, has resulted in progress on the framing of this request. We've learned a lot. And so the request for it to be a multimodal transportation assessment and to use that language was a adjustment we made after the first year of making the request, and in coordination and in conversations with WashDOT. One of the pivots we're making this year is we're getting feedback that it needs to be a regional request. It can't just be a City of Lakewood request. So our one pager is focused on all of the different groups. So each year we're getting sort of another piece of the puzzle that's helping make this more competitive. The piece of puzzle that's really missing to be successful this year is the funding piece. Just that facing a significant shortfall in the transportation arena. But otherwise, the last few years of bringing this request forward have really refined it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I was going to ask if you'd received any feedback and had you tweaked things, and that you answered my question without me even asking it. So thank you very much.
Any other questions on this subject? Seeing no hands.
Okay. Well, just a few closing comments. So Councilmember Farmer noted that in your packet are also one pagers for each of these priorities, with the exception of the capital budget request for the LASA expansion. And Brianna mentioned previously that we anticipate this upcoming session to have some unique challenges, particularly because we anticipate it will be done at least partially virtually, if not completely virtually. So, and this change is coming on the heels of a change last session where many legislators decided that they were no longer going to accept paper copies of one-pagers or legislative agendas, and asked instead that the documents be emailed to them. So you may have noticed that the legislative agenda looks really familiar to agendas from the past in terms of format. But there's a key difference there, and that's that some of the priorities have hyperlinks where you can click to watch a short video about the request. And this was the idea of and executed by Ms. Shannon Kelly Fong, and I think is going to be a really valuable tool as we shift our approach in how we educate our delegation. And then in addition to the legislative agenda, the city also has a policy manual, and that outlines the city's position on a number of areas that routinely arise during the legislative session. For the sake of time, I hadn't planned on walking through the entire document, but it is in your council packet, and I'm happy to answer any questions about any topic within the policy manual.
So now's the time to raise your hand if you have a question on the policy manual as I scan. Mr. Caulfield has a comment.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a comment that, the policy manual, there are, a number of items in there should look very familiar to you, and that they're a continuation of issues that this body has taken a position on over the years, whether it's transportation or housing or adult family homes or financing, things along those lines. A couple of additions that we put in there relate to transportation, where kind of issues surrounding the I-5 JBLM corridor improvement project, for example, on the shared use path. So we have made essentially some tweaks around the edges. The other part of the legislative manual that we incorporate in there, and this was something that this body did late last year, was to include a commitment to equity in terms of how we approach legislative and policy issues. So including a statement on Indigenous populations, specifically related to the Nisqually tribe, who we work very closely with. So that's included in there. So really there shouldn't be any major surprises, but Mayor, what I would ask you and the council is, did we get it right? And then more importantly, have we missed anything? Because we've been working on this for a couple of months or several months now. And, something could have come up today actually that we have missed. I'd also like to point out that this is a living, breathing document. And as the council knows, as things come up, we can always add to it or remove items from it. So with that, Mayor, back to you.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Whalen.
Sorry, I'm late to the party, but I just want to thank everyone for putting good information together. But on the manager's last comment, the public safety section on page 69 of our packet, that seems new to me from the last time. It's a good addition if it isn't new, or if it is new, I should say. But the statewide police reform package, these are components of things we've discussed, but I don't recall seeing this in a legislative manual before now. All right.
So Deputy Mayor, that's correct. These are new proposals, and actually the city has taken a leadership role in working with both AWC as well as the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs as well. So Lakewood has been intricately involved in these items, and that's why they are here proposed for your consideration as well.
There's certainly items that reflect topical interests of the day, right? So I'm supportive certainly of having those in there. And it'll be interesting to see what kind of traction these issues get through AWC's efforts and our own. I would think a lot, but I assume it's going to be a topic. I don't know if Shelley or Brianna has any thoughts on that.
Sure, council member, I can offer just a few comments on that. So we are, I think I mentioned this in my overview, but there are over 60 different proposals being discussed in the police and criminal justice reform arena. How those 60 proposals winnow down to an amount that the legislature is likely to pass is still somewhat uncertain. My experience in these sort of hot topic, broad issue areas that the legislature decides to tackle is that there will likely be a handful of bills that are considered low-hanging fruit that all stakeholders can agree upon, including, WASPIC and the advocates, some of the very active community groups, and we'll see that pass. And then I would say there's bandwidth to take on one or two of the more controversial or nuanced issues that will require a great deal of stakeholder revisioning and whatnot. And then you'll see sort of that more controversial list narrow down. And then I wouldn't be surprised if this is a multi-year legislative effort, that this is not just a one and done, that, oh, they came in the 2021 session and passed a few bills. My guess would be this is an agenda that will carry forward in future years, not too different than what we've seen the environmental community do, where the environmental community each year brings forward a set of 3 priorities that they want to push forward.
Got it. Well, thank you.
Ms. Farmer.
To talk about late breaking, so I was made aware very recently of a local organization called Treatment First Washington, and I believe there are some ties to South Sound, and they're interested in pursuing a Treatment and Recovery Act, which I believe would amend state statute. So I don't know. I think that's more drug and alcohol abuse and recovery and taking a different approach rather than jailing folks. But that makes me think of mental health, which has been a large topic of conversation in years past, like 6 months ago, which feels like years past. I don't know what our prognosis is for treatment programs or mental health programs in this particular upcoming session, if you have any thoughts.
I can take that, Shelley. So the Treatment and Recovery Act, the general gist of it is that it will reclassify drug offenses from crimes to civil infractions for certain controlled substances. And as part of that reduction from it being a criminal infraction to a civil infraction, they combine that with requirements for an individual to get substance use treatment. So that's generally what that proposal is. There are several stakeholders that are bringing it forward. I believe that ACLU is the primary organization leading the lobbying effort, although the coalition is quite broad. And then I think your broader question is what is going on around the world in the world of substance abuse treatment and mental health. And that's a great question. I don't know that I'm equipped to go into a ton of detail at this point, other than to say that the state has embarked on a multi-year effort to reform our mental health system and increase the amount of resources going into treatment, both for addiction and mental health and other purposes. And so they're in the process of implementing this multi-year plan. And Shelley, if you have anything to add, please feel free to do so.
No, I think you covered it well.
So along that line, or along those lines, has there been any discussion of amending the current laws relating to involuntary commitment to enhance the ability of a family or perhaps law enforcement on the other side to force people into involuntary treatment for substance abuse or mental health issues? I know one housing advocate who uses the phrase in describing people in their tents along the side of the streets, they're dying with their rights on. And so even, I said, some of the most ardent homelessness help for homelessness people feel that our involuntary commitment laws don't give enough leeway to help people who really need it the most. But you said out the ACLU is sponsoring something, so I wouldn't expect them to be on board with that.
So yeah, I think that is a separate discussion from the Treatment and Recovery Act that Councilmember Farmer mentioned. I have heard what you're referencing in the policy discussions, but I have not heard of a specific legislative proposal coming forward making changes to the ITA. That there could very well be one under development. One thing that has been interesting for us as in this virtual environment is that there are stakeholder groups being held, but there is not as much transparency in those stakeholder groups as we've seen in a typical format. So if you get wind of a specific proposal, please do let us know. I think we're all adapting to this new work environment.
Mr. Volke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Along the lines of mental health, and I know that's not our main thing, but it still remains a very large community concern. When we talk to the Youth Council, they list that as one of their major concerns, that mental health of kids is a real problem. And the state has had, as you mentioned, Brianna, a major commitment over the last at least 2 years, maybe the last 4 years, towards mental health. But I've also been told by somebody who used to work in Olympia and was involved in a lot of budget wars and definitely in the last recession. And he told me the legislature goes for mental health because it's the one area that they can cut, because so many other areas have federal money tied to them, and they're and they're therefore you lose twice, right? You cut the state money, you lose the federal money, but mental health you can just cut and put people out on the street and they become somebody else's problem. So I really do, maybe personally, and I think as a group, that at least medium-term commitment to mental health after really generations of neglect by the state is still really important and is really a cornerstone of any homeless policy that we have, a lot of the housing policy, and you know, a number of other items that improvement in both the capacity of the mental health system, physical capacity, as well as supporting it with operational dollars is still a major linchpin of what we're trying to accomplish, especially in the urban areas, right? And in poor urban areas, I would hope that the Tacoma people would say the same thing. It's still very important to us. So how that fits in with all the other things, I'm not asking to start doing budget negotiations with people, but just know that the continuing improvement of the mental health impacts the day-to-day lives of a lot of our constituents here in Lakewood. A lot of them access mental health services. A lot more probably would access mental health services if they could. Or the rest of them are looking for a door, right? And so we have the co-responder program that I think we would like to expand because we only have one person. The county has built up a co-responder program. So if something like that comes along, I really do think this will be the year. I think we're sitting within the next 12 months that Pierce County will finally pull the trigger on the 0.1%. The earlier they do that, clearly that will help in our negotiations down. But I just want to make it clear that's still a very important topic to us and to our constituents. So thank you.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, and just to maybe expand a bit more. So 60% of the operating budget is obligated through federal funds or constitutionally, leaving only 40% left to be cut. And there are only so many agencies that fall within that 40%. Not only is mental health there, but I'll just put a plug in that's where all of our local state shared revenues exist as well, which is why we always have a target on our back anytime that cuts are being made. There are several legislators that went through the last economic recession where they did severe budget cuts instead of increased revenue. And those are the same legislators, many of them, that are saying the damage that we did in making cuts to our mental health system through the last economic recession are still being felt today. And this very strong refusal to make cuts. So I think that concern is what is providing a lot of momentum behind the revenue conversations on the operating budget side.
And
go ahead.
I was just going to add that, I agree with everything Brianna said. In addition, I think the COVID-19 pandemic and the need for quarantine and isolation combined with heading into the winter months, I think a lot of people are concerned that folks who may not normally experience any type of mental illness may be more prone to now. And so now more than ever is when mental health services are going to be needed and need to be accessible. So I think, just to emphasize everything you said, that's definitely on the minds of many legislators.
And the one comment I'll make that's specific to the co-responder program, part of the police reform conversation is around providing more mental health services and particularly increased funding for the co-responder program, so that law enforcement is doing the job of law enforcement and that mental health professionals are doing the job of mental health professionals. I think if you speak with either side of either perspective on that issue, there's general agreement that law enforcement officers are being asked to engage with the community in a way where they're providing mental health services or responding to mental health services, which is not what they're trained to do.
I see no further hands. Last chance. Well, it's the last chance for tonight, but I'm sure it's not the last chance in the oncoming legislative session. Thank you, ladies, for your fine presentation and your hard work. We know that success is a long trip, and keep coming back. So thank you again.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
And we move to Mr. Caulfield with report by the city manager.
Actually, Mayor, if you could turn it back over to Ms. Kelly Fong, she would like to walk you through our Pierce County legislative manual as well.
Ms. Kelly Fong.
Thank you, Mayor Anderson. So starting on page 76 of your packet is the Pierce County Policy Manual. And I'm just going to highlight some of the larger changes and additions to the manual. We do update this manual every year, so it takes into account, everything. So it's timely and relevant. So some of the big changes, starting on page 79, is the addition of the Lakewood population allocation. In the past, this has been described as the air corridor population. And essentially, we've just updated this to provide some more information, I should say, on all of the constraints that go into that, as well as kind of what we're looking for about inclusion and being flexible to local needs. And I know Community Economic Development Director Dave Buehler did have a report last week on this topic. Another big addition is on page 82, which is the addition of the Pierce County Transportation Coordinating Committee, essentially just asking for increased transparency, particularly in the scoring elements of the committee's work. And then also that the committee reaches out to member jurisdictions for additional feedback on how the process is currently being run. And then finally, the last major addition is on page 83, and it talks about the future commercial airfields on JBLM. This is a statement of opposition for using Joint Base Lewis McChord for commercial air services. So currently the Commercial Aviation Coordinating Committee is looking at potential commercial aviation sites throughout Washington state, and Joint Base Lewis McChord has continued to be on that list, even though it lacks a lot of local support, and it will also likely impact JBLM operations. So those are the major highlights of the Pierce County Policy Manual. Certainly answer any questions about any of the additions that I just read or any other changes to discuss.
Questions for Ms. Kelly Fong? See no hands. See no one waving. So thank you very much. Sorry to try to skip over you. Well, Ms. Farmer's got a late wave in here.
Sorry. So to follow on the conversation we were just having about mental health, we're hoping that the county will pull the trigger, so to speak, on its mental health tax. If something's important to us, it should be noted. I know that we've talked in the past, my grand 9 months here, about what we can say delicately, to use a better term. So I don't know if there's anything we can do around making sure that mental health is mentioned, that it's important to us. We're not requesting them to do anything, but I'd like to talk about that at some point.
Mr. Whalen, and then Mr. Whalen.
Okay.
Maybe I could just respond to Councilmember Farmer. So on page 80 of the Pierce County Legislative Manual, right at the top is behavioral health and chemical dependency tools, that is the 1/10% funding. And this was something that the council actually put in this legislative agenda this time last year. So that's what that is. And Ms. Kelly Fong, is that the only place we have it, or do we have it on the state side as well? Or is it because it's dedicated toward Pierce County, it's just here?
It's only in the county.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Mr. Whalen.
May I ask why it's under public safety?
It's a public safety item, yeah. public safety is very, very broad.
I think the other thing, Bummer, is that at least there is some perception that our officers are being asked to absorb some of the mental health work that's not otherwise being taken care of. They run into it in the field with some frequency. So that may be part of the reason that we make that association. You may be aware that we have an embedded mental health professional. For that reason, we were one of the first jurisdictions that did that.
Thank you.
Mr. Whalen?
Yeah, it might be a better heading than public safety, but it certainly can fit within there. It also fits within the category of the homelessness issue, right? Because we've all talked about the fact that enhanced mental health services certainly can be a key component of an effective homelessness strategy, right? Getting people the services they need. And just for Ms. Farmer's benefit, this is one of the issues, I don't think you're on yet, but when the issue came up about us having our ability to tax ourselves the same rate, we made an election to punt to the county because we felt that the regional resources would be much better for Lakewood, as well as for the region if the county adopted their own 1/10 of 1% as opposed to Tacoma having theirs and Lakewood having theirs and that kind of thing. So that's why the genesis of it is here. It's our hope as a council that this goes to the county for action.
I was here and I completely.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, sorry about that.
Better leverage.
Yeah.
I do have. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I have a follow-up question also along the public safety lines. So the flood control zone district, public safety because people are in danger if it floods, or I guess public safety in my mind is a fairly, I know it's broad, but I don't know if there's a land use. I don't know. Just okay. Thanks.
Yeah, it is kind of tough.
Okay, Mr. Branstetter.
Yes, Mayor. I think that on our support for asking the county to come up with a regional funding tool for mental health is it may be better if we could move that under another heading in our policy manual, given that this is in the conversations. There is discussions often spoke about move funding away from police and public safety and into social services and mental health. And it can be worded just as it is, but I think putting it under a different heading frames it better for folks that look at what is it that we're advocating for.
Right. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I'd be for that.
Yeah, I don't see any. I wouldn't have a problem with that at all. I mean, it's. I think it's additive, and that makes it more clear that our request is additive.
So separate category.
Mr. Caulfield, report by the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Since Ms. Kelly Fong is still on here, I'd like to compliment her and her leadership in coordinating our we call it garbage and yard waste, et cetera, drop off this past Saturday morning and afternoon. She reported this morning that it was probably upwards of 280 or 90 vehicles that came through in a very short period of time. And that actually, she's looking into it, but that actually might be a record compared to last year during our previous spring and fall events, which were also very, very popular. But also, and probably most importantly, is a lot of happy people with a lot of smiles coming through the line, and very appreciative for the city in doing that. And again, wouldn't have happened without Ms. Kelly Fong. So just wanted to thank her for that. Some other updates. As you know, we've been working with a number of economic developers, including the Tacoma Pierce County Economic Development Board regarding REI and maybe having them have a satellite office down here in Pierce County. So one of the things we did last week is we sent a letter directly to the CEO of REI promoting the benefits and opportunities that exist here in Lakewood, particularly Lakewood Landing. We're also working with RPAI, who is a majority property owner in our town center, to see if they too would be interested in either sending their own letter or partnering with us, making their area available for some kind of future development that would allow REI satellite operations to be here in Lakewood. We also sent a letter to the Sound Transit Board, and the purpose of this was regarding their recommendation to quote unquote pause 2 projects in Lakewood, one being the station parking and access, as well as the sounder maintenance station project, which is under design right now. Actually, both are under planning and design. The Sound Transit Board met this past Thursday after they received our letter. So the good news is that they decided to continue moving forward on the project that would eventually expand the Lakewood station for additional parking, as well as additional trains coming through there sometime in the near future. However, they did decide to continue to pause the sounder maintenance station. And so they plan on taking a look and making a final decision on that no later than June of 2021. And quite frankly, our hope is that hopefully the economy will improve to a point by then where they don't have to do that. And actually, they don't have to do that with a number of projects. And the reason I bring this up is because I remember 10 years ago, Sound Transit went through this exact process. And then within 2 or 3 years, they were literally, no pun intended here, back on track with all of their projects. In any event, just wanted to let you know we continue to be proactive in that area. Every January, early January for the last 3 years, the local group, the Lakewood Community Foundation, comes before you with the annual Larry Saunders Service Award. And in 2021 is going to be no different. They actually have a awards recognition committee, which includes a member of the community and a board member from their foundation, but it also includes a member of this body, the Lakewood City Council. And the last 3 years, it was actually Councilmember Marie Barth. Obviously, she is no longer on the council. So, Mayor, I would ask that you and your colleagues consider who might want to sit on that review committee to select the 4th annual Larry Saunders Service Award. Again, that will be recognized at your either, I think it's first or second meeting in January. Our commercial landlord assistance program is off to a very, very strong start. Within 48 hours, we had 6 applications, and we've received a number of positive feedback and interest in the program. So I'm expecting the money, quite frankly, to go very, 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 very quickly. Our farmers market, unfortunately, on Friday was canceled. Inclement weather, the vendors just weren't going to come out with their they just didn't want to come out. It was just a bad afternoon. However, there are 3 more Fridays where the farmers market will be open, beginning this Friday, and then also on October 9th and 16th. At this point in time, unless things completely change and we get into phase 4, unfortunately, we will not be able to do our Christmas tree lighting and parade like we have done for a number of years. However, Ms. Dodsworth, our Parks and Recreation director, has come up with a reverse parades lights, which she is going to do over at the Colonial Plaza. So the way it's going to work is the folks that normally would be in the parade, including Santa, will actually be at Colonial Plaza, and then everybody can drive through Colonial Plaza and check out the items and the floats and everything that will be in the parade. So that is scheduled to happen on Saturday, just December 12th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Also, unfortunately, one of my favorite events, the Truck and Tractor Day event, is going to be canceled. And I had to ask the question. I said, why? We can maintain social distancing. And then it was politely explained to me that, it's people like you're going to be going up there, touching everything, touching the trucks and the heavy equipment and such. So that made perfect sense to me. So I get it. But again, unfortunately, we're going to have to do without that. Also, we're going to have our last drive-in movie on October 16th at Fort Steilacoom Park. It's a Friday after the last farmers market, and it'll start at 7 p.m. and go to the city's website to purchase tickets there. Actually, with that, Mayor, that's my report. Actually, just in closing, just want to let you know next Monday, I will be presenting the proposed biennial budget for 2021 and 2022. We will be working up to the last minute like we normally do in these instances. So we'll probably be hand delivering, or rather hand downloading sometime on Monday or maybe Sunday evening what the proposed budget looks like. But at this point in time, I wouldn't expect it until sometime on Monday. So with that, Mayor, that's my report. Back to you, sir.
Questions for the city manager? I would note that Kent Keel from UP is in his capacity at Sound Transit called me before their meeting and was skeptical as to whether he'd be able to save anything. And so the word that they at least maintained part of the project that was scheduled for Lakewood is a good thing. One thing I think to look at, although I don't know that Sound Transit will ever consider it this way on the maintenance facility, is if I'm of the mind that it's likely that if this was a private project, that would go in because it makes economic sense, because they're currently paying top dollar to Burlington Northern to do all their maintenance. But they have a capital budget and an operational budget, and never are the two considered in the same equation. And so they, in all likelihood, will save on their operational budget, but it's competing on the capital side against making enhancements to King County Light Rail extensions. So I don't know that it's going to fare that well, although it does make some economic sense to do it as planned.
Actually, Mayor, and I have one more item. I have a little note here real quick, if I could.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So late this afternoon, I received a call from Pierce County from their director of facilities. And apparently the Pierce County Superior Court has a huge pent up demand of civil cases, I think approaching 300 that need jury trials. And so right now, the way that, the environment that we're in and with the city county building, they're not able to get jury trials for all of those. So they're looking at satellite locations. One of the locations that they're looking at is their Park and Rec building, of which the city rents a small portion for our senior activity center. The portion that we rent is actually could set up quite nicely for one of their courts. And so they've expressed an interest in using that. At this point in time, I don't really have a major objection through the end of the year, or even into early 2021. And by the way, they would have two courts over there, one in our area that we're currently leasing, and then an upstairs area that their current staff are using. It's still very preliminary, but the benefit to the city is we wouldn't have to pay rent for whatever period of time that, they're using it. One of the things that I did explain was, our senior center, we don't have any place else to go. So once we get to, at least, phase 4, we are going to want to get up and running and operational again. And so we still have an interest in maintaining that site as our senior activity center. But that just occurred late this afternoon. So I just wanted to kind of give you a heads up, a warning order on that. And so I'll be talking with Ms. Dodsworth about that tomorrow or later on this week.
And just for the record, I'm recusing myself with respect to any decision that's made on that. I believe it's the city manager's decision at this point, but because of my position at the county, I'm not taking part in the county's economic aspect of that either. Anything else in the way of questions for the city manager?
Yeah, Mayor, I'd like to just mention, I've been asked to, I appreciate that we're doing the commercial rental program. And I also want to point out that the county has a fairly robust and has quite a bit more money in it and resources in it. So I want to make sure that folks here in Lakewood understand that that's available to them also. I don't know what our limits are, but theirs are 8,000 a month for 3 months is what I was told. So if it could dovetail with ours, that would be great. And I don't know how the eligibility standards are different than ours, so I'm not gonna, but I actually, Councilmember Richardson asked me to remind you that that's available out there, and he has some interest in making sure that the folks in the business community know that.
And it's likely that the county's limits on funding will be lifted on both individual rentals and commercial rentals. So I guess the lesson there is that if we have demand in Lakewood that we can't satisfy, don't turn people away, point them at the county. Now, Mr. Caulfield brought up the issue of the Larry Saunders Award Committee. It seems like it needs to be handled in a fairly timely manner if we're going to have an award in January. So, are you interested, Mr. Volke? Is that, you're muted, but.
Yeah, I'm interested in doing it.
Anyone have any objection to that or want to?
That's great.
All right. Deemed accomplished here.
So Mr. City Manager, I'll just wait to hear from somebody.
Yes, Councilmember, the city clerk, Brianna Schumacher, will let the group know, and I believe they're looking to schedule some time in late October, early November.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Anything further, Mr. Caulfield?
No, Mayor.
So at this point, we will recess into executive session for approximately 30 minutes pursuant to RCW 4230-110-1G to review the performance of a public employee. The county is not expected to take final action following the executive session, coming back only to adjourn. So if council would please follow your directions to get into the private Zoom meeting for the executive session.
And we have like a 2-minute break to run to the executive room.
Yes. We'll wait for you.
All right, sounds good.
Hello again.
Hello.
I'm going to need to talk to you about some documents tomorrow.
Okay.
So bug me if I don't get a hold of you.
Okay, I'll give you a call.
It's been 30 minutes and we're just coming back to adjourn. So our study session's adjourned. Good night.
Good night.